When an important product like the Denon A1H hits the channel, you don't waste time, you just jump right in. And this 15.4 channel Dolby Atmos surround sound receiver, which is made in Japan, produces 150 watts per channel into 8 ohms, but note that that is with 2 channels driven. Now power increases to a reported 190 watts into 6, again, in stereo. The A1H all channels driven figures are not given, but similar to Marantz and their 70% rule, Denon has unofficially followed suit, which would put at least its 5 or maybe even its 7 channel figure in the ballpark of about 100 watts per channel. And I can already hear you, and you're not alone. I wish all manufacturers would just state their true multi-channel power output rather than make consumers guess, or worse, second guess. But that's a topic for another day. But given the size of the A1H's power supply and just general amplifier construction, it should have zero issues driving just about any speaker, stereo or surround. With 15 channels of amplification inside, the A1H can be configured in stereo all the way up to 9.4.6. Now, about that .4. Yes, the A1H has 4 subwoofer outs, and yes, they are independent. Better still, there are both RCA and XLR style preamp outs for the subwoofer outs. Sadly though, Denon's remaining preamp outputs are unbalanced, which is fairly common and just something to keep in mind in case you got a little excited when you eyed the A1H's balanced subwoofer outs. Like the previous Denon and Marantz receivers that we've reviewed, the A1H can be put into a strict preamp mode, turning it into a home theater processor for use with third-party amplifiers. When it comes to HDMI, the Denon has 7 HDMI inputs and 3 HDMI outs, all of which are HDMI 2.1, supporting signals up to 8K 60 and 4K 120, with its main HDMI out also having support for ARC and eARC. You're going to find support for all major HDR formats, including HDR10+, as well as Dolby Vision. It even scales legacy signals like HD all the way up to 8K. And if you want a game in 15 channels surround, the A1H isn't lacking in that department either, sporting features like VRR, ALLM, and quick frame transport. And this receiver has a host of physical and wireless connections. There's no time to get into every option, but here are some of the highlights. A built-in phono preamp, AM/FM tuner, Bluetooth, AirPlay, HEOS multi-room, and streaming app support. And it also is room tested, plus it has smart home functions like Google Home, Alexa, Siri, and more. And while I hesitate to say that Denon can do everything, I mean, there's bound to be something, a format out there in the past perhaps, but in 2024, the A1H is about as jam-packed an AVR as I have ever seen. Now, at almost 80 pounds, you may need a little help getting the A1H out of the box. This is a high-performance AVR. Outwardly, it looks like most other Denon receivers on the market, but if you start to look through the vents, you're going to see that this is no Costco SKU. The A1H has more in common with, say, the PMA A110 integrated than it does, say, a Denon 670H. And if you're considering the Denon for yourself and wondering about potential speaker pairings, the bulk of our testing was done using the new Focal Aria Evo X #2 towers and their matching center, along with our 6 in-ceiling clip speakers and a single subwoofer, which is KEF's new KC92. This speaker sub combo turned out to be a very nice pairing for the Denon. Now, I tested the A1H's stereo performance with Bowers & Wilkins' new 801 signature towers and was pleasantly surprised by the results. The 801s are a very difficult speaker to drive, and yet the A1H drove them quite comfortably. Now, adding a separate amplifier to the Denon, in this case the Emotiva XPA with its 300 watts, did produce better control and depth from the speaker's dual 10-inch woofers. Both the B&W and Focal speakers have wildly varying impedances, so it was really nice to see that the A1H could keep up with zero signs of stress. If you are concerned about heat, the Denon gets hot, especially during spirited listening, so be aware. While I doubt the A1H will be anyone's first AVR, the Denon's guided setup feature and impressive on-screen menus will make the initial setup relatively painless. Now, pro users, you can opt out of this walkthrough and get straight to the meat and potatoes, which is what I did. Now, clearly the A1H's 15 channels are probably overkill for most users. I mean, even in our large room, we only can support Atmos configurations up to 7.4.2 or 5.4.4, and I settled on a 5.1.2 and then later a 5.1.4 setup. The Denon supports both ODYSSEY and DIRAC room correction software, but if you are one who prefers to, say, manually EQ your receiver and speakers, the A1H is just okay. There's a basic graphical EQ, some tone controls and whatnot, but beyond that, not much else to get excited about. And I really wish Denon would implement PEQ in their higher-end models to give users like me a greater degree of control, something I believe is not only necessary, but kind of expected at this price point. And before you say, but Andrew, you can adjust the curves in Audyssey and DIRAC, I'm going to get to you in a minute. Now, Audyssey Multi-EQ XT32 is included with the Denon, but you'll have to pony up some cash for DIRAC Live, $299 to be exact. Don't feel like paying for DIRAC. Audyssey will improve the sound of your speakers in your room. You'll even get some dynamic enhancements and bass limiting features for late night listening. Still though, it doesn't come close to matching the results from DIRAC. Now for this review, I bought the full version of DIRAC Live and their new bass control software for a single subwoofer, which costs $649, bringing the total cost of ownership to $7,148. If you need DIRAC support for multiple sub, that's going to cost you an extra $150. So for those of you bad at math, that's a total of $7,300. But man, what a difference DIRAC makes. While the DIRAC license is technically an optional upgrade, I don't consider it to be one. The Denon sounds fine on its own, but once DIRAC got to work, the A1H went into kick-ass mode. Before DIRAC, I would classify the Denon sound as a little soft, sluggish, and warm, but after, it was like a recently divorced man with a personal trainer. I mean, this receiver sounded more firm, more detailed, and more dynamically interesting at all volumes. Now, for the record, this was my first opportunity experiencing DIRAC bass control, and it may have just made my losing sleep over subwoofer placement and setup a thing of the past. I mean, it completely transformed the character and presence of Kef's new sub in a way that I just was not fully able to replicate manually using my methods through Room EQ Wizard and Mini DSP. And while I don't technically own the A1H, it is a review sample. My investment in DIRAC for this review is shaping up to be one of my better home theater purchases. It's just a cry and shame that DIRAC licenses aren't transferable to my other receivers. I mean, seriously, what the f***? Now, on its own, and with no room correction, the A1H, at least in stereo, reminded me a lot of Denon's own PMA A110. I'm not gonna say they're identical, but sound-wise, they're close. I love the Denon's character. pianists like Luna or David Lanz were just so dang listenable and organic. When I turned to more rock or pop music, though, I sometimes felt that the Denon was a little bit subdued, maybe even polite dynamically speaking, something I noted when listening to Robin's Criminal Intent. To be clear, the information, the detail, and the definition, they are all still there, but they just felt a little distant or soft around the edges. Now, engaging DIRAC with bass management was like swapping the Denon out for a completely different receiver, one more in common output-wise with, say, Rotel or, oh my god, Krell. I'm not saying Denon is the same, but its presence and command over the speaker's drivers definitely improved, resulting in more clarity and, to me, a better sound. I still think the A1H aims for neutrality with or without DIRAC. That said, the in-room presence and delineation improves tenfold with DIRAC. Rock standards like Enter Sandman and The Noose sounded next level through the Denon Focal and Kef subwoofer combo. And as for the stereo soundstage, the Denon will not rob speakers with good dispersion like the Focals of their spaciousness. With DIRAC engaged, the focus and separation between instruments and performers was on lock. Without it, some of the instrument's edges and performers' physicality could start to blend together, resulting in that softer vibe I spoke about a moment ago. Shifting to surround sound, specifically movies mixed in Dolby Digital or Atmos, and again, with DIRAC engaged, the A1.8 dishes out a cinematic performance that bested our current reference receiver, the Sony 7000 ES. It was stone cold better. That said, if I relied on Audyssey or no room correction of any kind, the Sony was back on top. Audyssey gives the Denon a more treble forward, less intelligible sound, and if no correction is applied, the sound was just too bass heavy and just laid back for me. But getting back to the A1H with all of its goodies activated, my God. Transformative is not a strong enough word. Watching the climactic battle in the flash felt at times like my room was just gonna rip itself apart at the foundation. Even at slightly above moderate volumes, I'm talking peaks around, say, 70 dB in room. The impact and definition was impressive. Never mind if you turn the volume up with peaks cresting 100 dB. The way the sound transitioned front to back, side to side was Sony level good. Again, with DIRAC engaged. While the B&Ws benefited from the presence of an Emotiva amplifier when pressed into home theater service with the Focals, the Denon had more than enough power on its own. A real quick word on dialogue clarity. With DIRAC engaged and relying on a dedicated center speaker like the Aria Evo X Center, dialogue intelligibility was top-notch. I mean, there's no issues to report. But what was surprising was how even with DIRAC engaged, dialogue takes a rather noticeable step backwards when relying on a phantom center setup when listening in surround. I mean, I could still understand everything being said, but it just wasn't as clear or as, center channel-like as it is when I do a phantom center on the Sony 7000 ES. I don't know if this is a Denon issue or maybe it's an issue with Dolby. Nevertheless, if you're a fan of using a phantom center, I'm not sure the A1H is the best option. Now, our receiver does have to do more than be good at sound, so let's take a look at the A1H's video performance. First, switching between HDMI inputs was snappy and error-free. I mean, it had no issues gaming at high frame rates with and without HDR, and while I'm not a competitive gamer, there wasn't any noticeable lag that I feel a lot of gamers should be concerned about. Now, the Denon does have upscaling and some basic processing, but I would skip these features. Instead, just use the A1H's HDMI ports for switching and then allow your TV or your source component to handle the processing. And I say this because Denon doesn't give you a lot of adjustments over their video mode presets. Plus, they have rather noticeable effect on the image. For example, when doing a few A/B tests, the Denon oversaturated colors and it really crushed black levels to such a degree that it robbed dark scenes of their definition and clarity while turning people into Oompa Loompas. So I suggest that you leave these settings off, which thankfully is the default. Denon's control app is great. I love it. As far as I can tell, the app gives you full control over the A1H's entire setup menu in real time and in the palm of your hand. It makes comparing and contrasting different settings, especially DIRAC profiles, an absolute breeze. Now, I've already gone over some things you may want to keep in mind when deciding if the A1H will be a good fit for you. But by far, my biggest gripe is that despite the A1H's flagship status, enjoying its best performance isn't automatic out of the box. If you want the very best the A1H can offer, you are forced into deciding which a la carte DIRAC service to buy. I totally understand why a brand does this with their less expensive products, but come on. We're talking about a $6,500 AVR. Put DIRAC in the box. It's not optional, it's vital. Out of the box, the Denon is solid, but with the full suite of DIRAC tools applied, its performance is god tier. With that rant over, I did encounter a minor CEC bug. Upon power up, half of the A1H's display wouldn't work. I mean, the Denon would power on and sound could be heard, but the source name and volume weren't always displayed. Switching inputs does fix this, nevertheless, it happens. And to be clear though, the bug has zero effect on the Denon's overall performance. Getting right to comparisons. First up is our Sony 7000 ES. The A1H is the better receiver when fully kitted out with the full suite of DIRAC software. The Denon costs more than twice what the Sony commands, so one would expect it to come out on top. All that said, even with all of its bells and whistles engaged, the Denon doesn't run away with the win here. It is a far closer matchup than you would think. Definitely closer than I'm sure some would even want to admit. And without DIRAC's additional bass management software, I'm actually giving the nod to Sony because for less than half the price, it does nearly as much as the Denon while just sounding cinematically thrilling all on its own. Oh, and real quick, the Denon has support for Sony like 360 audio, but it's not the same as Sony's spatial mapping tech. So yeah, that secret sauce is still exclusive to Sony. And I can already hear you saying, what about the Cinema 30? Oh, I wish we could get into that for you, and one day I'm sure we will. We have requested the Cinema 30 for review, it just hasn't arrived yet. Now, compared to ONKYO's RZ70, the Denon is technically better, but the ONKYO's value is so hard to beat. For 99% of home theater customers who don't care too much about brand loyalty, the RZ70's features and power are more or less equal to the Denon. The biggest difference is sound quality. The ONKYO has a more neutral to maybe leaner and dynamically punchy tone. And somehow, ONKYO manages to include DIRAC with purchase. Yeah, you're gonna have to pay extra for the bass control, but $349, on a less expensive initial purchase is a way easier pill to swallow than $700 that you have to spend on top of the Denon's $6,500 asking price. The Yamaha A8A is another AVR to consider. You can find the Yamaha's flagship receiver at a lower price point than the Denon. The 8 is similar in power, just with fewer channels. There is no DIRAC or ODYSSEY, and its GUI is nowhere near as slick as the Denon, but for those who like to tweak and make a product their very own, it's actually the better choice compared to any AVRs on this list. And if you put a premium on neutrality and specs, the Yamaha will probably be the winner. And if you want more comparisons, go ahead and leave your questions in the comments, and we're going to answer those on Friday's next Unplugged, which is where you'll find Christy. So to wrap it up, do I like the Denon? You betcha I do. Do I think it's worth $7,000? Remember, I don't think DIRAC is optional. Yeah, I think it's worth it. Do you need the A1H? Most people, probably not. But that doesn't stop it from being an absolute tour de force. I mean, I believe this could be the finest AVR on the market right now. So that's it for me and what I think of Denon's flagship A1H receiver. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Leave your comments down below. You never know, it may appear in next Friday's Unplugged. And if you like this video, go ahead, do all the things. Thumbs up, like, subscribe, ring the bell, the whole bit. And if you use any of the links that Christy's left for you down below, know that that's a great way that you've continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here. Lastly, follow me on Instagram. And until next time, remember, the only person who has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next one. Bye.